Welcome back, Flyers nitty-gritty fans, to Getting Gritty with It with your host, Yariv, Wolok, and my special guest for the evening, returning guest, Jason Myrtetus. You should all know who he is. You definitely should listen to his podcast. If you don't, if you do, excited to have his attitude and his opinions on this one, because I listened to it, like I said last time, pretty much every day. I haven't missed an episode for a while. So, Jason, thank you for joining.
You're the one.
Yeah.
That listens to all of them. Good job. Thanks for having me. It's been a fun couple of weeks, and I've been really kind of just really pumped up with all the conversation. Like, not everybody likes all the moves. There are moves that some people like to varying degrees, and there's some that they hate to varying degrees, and kind of everywhere in between. But the conversation that's been there has been awesome, because I think the biggest thing, you haven't even asked me a question, I'm already going nuts.
No, it's fine. Go into it.
But I think the biggest thing that happened was there was this question mark going in. Oh, is Chuck going to do anything? Sleepy Chuck. Does Chuck know how to use a computer? He's not going to do anything. You can say it's unacceptable, but if you don't do anything and you run it back, is that really unacceptable? So I just so appreciate the way that he attacked this offseason. Didn't do anything to pacify a fan base on their timeline. Did things organically and very strategically. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is, I love the message that he's sent out publicly, because he's talked about, like, I was stunned when he said, slow start since I've been here, and allegedly before that, and there's a malaise around the team, and we had to change the dynamic. Like, to say that behind closed doors is normal, but to say that outwardly in public with high-end players that have been here a long time, I was stunned to hear that, and I was refreshed to hear it, because I think what it does, I think the message is there. There's been a lot of change, but the message has gone further to guys that are still here. That, guys, I made a lot of changes. I'm willing to do it. If this element doesn't change, or you're not part of the solution, then I will move on. And I don't care how long you've been here. I just shipped out Shane Gostisbehere, who's been here a long time. I shipped out Jake Voracek, and I liked them both as people. But this isn't about liking them as people. It wasn't working from a hockey standpoint. So I think there's been a real message that he has sent this offseason, and I've been really impressed with the way he's handled it, and I think Flyers fans have as well for the most part.
I think that's an excellent way to start, because if we're going to go into, I would say all of what I want to go into is essentially coming from Fletcher's mindset, because I completely agree with you, and I don't think it was very fair that people were even questioning whether Fletcher was going to do something or not, because when he first took over, it was the same type of thing. He took over when Hackstall was being removed, or before Hackstall was being removed. Everybody wanted him to fire Hackstall immediately. He didn't. He waited. And it's like I keep saying that patience is a virtue for a reason, right? Like, it's not an easy thing to do. And when everybody's screaming, he was very aggressive his first year. He did make big moves the first year after everybody wanted. And again,
through a legit assessment period.
Yes, exactly. And it looks like he did that again, right? He gave them the whole season. He gave them the ability to rebound. He did his exit interviews with everybody. He assessed the situation, and then he went for it. And the one thing I brought this up with my last episode with Chris Mayer is I love the way he went about it. He made, I don't like calling them risky, but he made expensive moves, right? He made powerful moves, but then in free agency he approached it in the opposite direction, which I think helps balance out everything that he did, and it just shows his mindset where he likes to take risks, but measured risks. Like, if you compare him to like Paul Holmgren and Hextall, he seems to be like right in the middle, where Holmgren would keep going over and over again. Fletcher will pull and then kind of push back, and then pull back a little bit, be like, okay, I push my lineup, but I'm also not going to go nuts here and throw everything at the wall, right?
He's not risk averse, which is, and I've talked about this even prior to this, the period of the offseason after the cup was handed out with, the trades and expansion draft, NHL draft, and now free agency, that you have to be a team that's willing to take on risk in a 32-team league that is rich with parity. There's so much parity. I mean, think about it. The 18th best record in the NHL, the Montreal Canadiens this year, went to the Cup final. Yes. They finished a point better than the Flyers. Yeah. And they went to the final. And it's not like they got some easy path to get there. No, they had to beat Toronto after being down 3-1. They didn't lose. They didn't trail in a game for like the next 10 games. They went in. They beat the brakes off the Winnipeg Jets, who I thought were a pretty good team. Now, they were banged up and there was some circumstance there, but who cares? They went in and they kicked the doors off them. And then you get the Las Vegas Golden Knights, who just upset Colorado, and you take them out.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, heavy favorites, and you get to the final. Look, Tampa was too much. That was a ridiculous, that's an all-time great team.
Yes, agreed.
And they still hung in there and made them earn everything they got. But that's what the league is. So you have to take on risk, and I've said, like, to win a cup, it takes so many. It used to be really good roster, get hot and healthy at the right time, and some good coaching. Now the list of things, the boxes you need to check to win a cup is about everything. 9 boxes long, right?
Everything.
I mean, you have to have a tremendous. You almost have to have a circumstantial luck event in every series in some way to win. It's just the way it is. I always harken back to that Braden Holtby paddle save when the Capitals went on to win. Like, that was a great save. It's just a reaction, and it was one of the great saves of all time. There's a lot of luck involved in that save. That changed everything. That's the save that told them they could win the cup.
Yep.
And you got to have those moments, and anybody's capable of doing it. Any goalie's capable of doing it. Like, we saw Alex Lyon diving backwards and pulling a puck off the goal line last. Like, anybody's capable of that save. But
sorry to cut you off, but the Brian Boucher save that led the Flyers into the playoffs, right? They used that momentum.
Yep.
That save goes the other way. Flyers don't even make it.
Exactly, and those moments just propel you as a group. They stick a jetpack on your rear end. You skate faster, you play harder, and it does the opposite for the opposition. It's deflating on one end and it's inflating on the other. So that combination is lethal in the playoffs. So it fascinating offseason. He did take on some risk. I mean, even with guys like Ryan Ellis, there's some risk there because of the term and some injury history, but you got to take it on. You have no choice.
Yeah, no, well said. Let's go through my topics here, and we're going to get back to Ellis and that group as well. I do want to talk about the most recent. Actually, 1 second. Do want to give a shout out to Jim Steaks, our sponsor. They are Flyer fans on 3rd Street. Please make sure to check them out. Get a cheesesteak there, please. All right, let's get into it.
I love Jim's too, by the way.
Yeah, they're awesome, and they have all the Flyers history on the wall. It's like
and they have the bell peppers.
Yes,
so good.
Oh, now I want it. I'm in Israel right now, and there are no cheesesteaks here, so I'll have to wait some time.
Well, the funny thing, like, I used to go to Jim Steaks with my dad before Flyer games all the time. My dad loved it, so we would go there. We'd get a steak before if it was a day game, we'd go after the game. Mm-hmm. My dad had season tickets at the Spectrum, Section R, Row 7. So it was right above the glass.
Yeah, and that's great.
Yeah, initially we were Section R, I think it was row like 20, which was right against the wall in the first level. And right next to us was where Ed Snyder's at, so we could sit there and we could look at his TV for replays and stuff. But then we moved down to row 7, so we would go there all the time. Like, during the week, my mom would drop me off at the Spectrum because my dad worked in the city, and I would meet him there. He'd go down and have, like, drinks or whatever with the guys that he worked with at Ovations, and I'd be up watching warm-ups. Old school days, and then after the games or before the games, we'd always go to Jim's and get a steak. So, anyway.
Yeah, but every time you eat it probably takes you right back to that. Yeah.
Immediately.
Well, go get a Jim's Steaks.
Yeah.
I'm sure they appreciate it. All right. Well, that's a good story. Actually, I remember my dad used to take me to, I don't know if anybody knows this place called Aldo's Pizzarama. It's in the Northeast. Mm-hmm. They have pretty good cheesesteaks too. That was our cheesesteak spot on the way home. But always a cheesesteak after a Flyers game. It's probably like a
it was like a treat. It was like, oh my God, I went to a Flyers game today and had a great steak.
Yeah.
And my dad was like, cuisine was one of the great things of life, like, and local cuisine. So, like, the two in your memory bank are like interlocked now.
Yeah.
One reminds you of the other, which is awesome.
Yeah, that is awesome. All right, that's a good story, actually. All right, well, let's get into something not that fun, but I do want to talk about it a little bit. So Sanheim not Sanheim, actually. The Flyers have elected to take Sanheim into arbitration. From my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong about this, typically if a team does this, it has to do with term, not necessarily a dollar amount, an average salary cap hit per year. Is that accurate? Do you know if that's inaccurate by any chance?
I believe that is accurate.
Yeah.
And it's kind of fascinating to me. Like, teams and players try to avoid this.
Always.
Because it's just not a comfortable situation. Like, the team doesn't want to go into an arbitration hearing and telling the story of all the flaws of the player. It's just it's hard for the player to hear, and the player and the representation are doing the other, saying all the virtues, and you're sitting there and you're trying to shoot holes in it. And it's not one of those things that's a healthy element of sport, but it's a necessary element of sport because you do have to come together. And I was pretty surprised that I don't think it's going to get there. This is a lot of posturing that happens. I don't think they actually, I mean, we could get to the day of. They could sign the deal on the steps of the courthouse, basically. So I don't think they'll get there. I think this is just part of the process of coming together on a next term that leads the player to free agency, if that's the term they go with. So I understand why the Flyers did it, because they go, okay, we get what you're asking for, appreciate your position, but we'll take you to arbitration. And that player doesn't want to go to arbitration right now. It really doesn't. It was a rough year.
Yes.
And the comps aren't good. And, the Flyers this is a way for them to gain hand in this negotiation, because no matter what, you still, even if you love the player and you love what they bring to the table and you love the arc of development, it's a salary cap equation. This is business. This isn't personal. This is the business part of it. And they have a tight cap situation and a flat cap world, so they got to do the best they can to make sure the player's happy with it, but also you can't overpay right now. It's not a position they can put themselves in. So it'll be interesting how it plays out, but I don't think it'll actually get to arbitration.
I think that's actually pretty wise and probably accurate. That I think it is kind of like their move in negotiation to kind of push things forward, because Sanheim, if you're going to look at his numbers from this past year, it's not going to give him, at least from an arbitrator standpoint, you're not going to have leverage in that situation.
Nah, so, you end up at 3.25.
Well, what do you think? Yeah, I think if he's going to get a salary bump, he's going to get a minor one, right? So 3.75 or something is probably what they're offering. The question is years. I would assume the Flyers are trying to lock him up for several years and take advantage of the fact he had a down year and be like, can we get him locked up for 4 or 5 years at 3.75? And Sanheim probably being like, well, I'll give you 1 or 2 at that rate.
I imagine that he wants a bridge, a chance to rebuild his resume, if you will, with a team that's better and is deeper. So I don't know. I don't know where the hang up is. I don't know if it's on term. Sure, they would love to do that. Like, hey, but you're going to have to go higher if you're going to go anywhere in that 4 or 5 range, because now you're buying years of him at being a UFA. So, and he's smart. He's going, the cap's probably going to go up in a year or 2. Mm-hmm. So, why am I going to lock myself into a cap percentage when it's locked at its lowest that it's going to be for me going forward, when I can do a 2-year deal and then do another one when the cap is escalating? So it's the pickle barrel. I think that they'll end up with a bridge deal, a 3-year deal, kind of compromise in between. He wants 5, they want 2, and find somewhere in between. But I mean, you also have to be careful, because I said that wrong, by the way. They want 5, he wants 2.
Right.
You got to be careful too, because then you're walking a player to free agency and you can really cash in. But that's a good problem to have.
Yeah, agreed. And I think with Hart, the fact we didn't hear that, I think they'll probably get something done with Hart easily, generally easily. Do you think at this point, with the cap implications being an issue, not so much of an issue, and obviously we brought a bunch of guys over, but do you think that there is a player that's likely to get moved out maybe in the off season, because we have Couturier, we have Giroux coming up? I think Giroux is going to get re-signed here, and I think they're going to swap contracts slightly. But then you look at some other guys who need contracts. Do you think that there's a chance that a guy like JVR, I don't know if a buyout is necessary, but maybe they end up shipping somebody out to move some more money out? Like even this year, I brought up the idea of Aubé Kubel, somebody who I think has value, not a guy they want to lose, But a guy who's making $1 million, you're right up against the cap. Maybe you can get a third-round pick, maybe even a second-round pick since he was a second-round pick. Like, is there an option there where you move a young guy out and even get $1 million back just to give you a little bit of space? Because you could replace him with maybe even somebody slightly cheaper. Do you see any scenario like that during the season?
Yeah, especially if the guy's got a year beyond this one, because the savings is more pronounced. As you go into the season, the amount of savings lessens. It's like cap space grows,
right,
and then a player's cap hit lessens through a season because it's prorated.
Sure.
So, yeah, that could happen. And I think, like you mentioned, a guy like Nick, I think that could happen with him if, Allison comes in, Tanner Lisinski comes in, and Morgan Frost comes in and shows that, okay, this is a redundant player for us. I think that's when that could happen.
That doesn't even include Bunneman as well.
Yeah, and Connor Bunneman as well. But I mean, Bunny's a guy that's been really versatile, can play the middle, can play the wing.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, if you're in a redundant situation with a fourth line player, it doesn't make sense to carry a little extra money on that player, especially if you can get something in return. It's almost like you're doing a favor for your team and player.
Yeah,
more opportunity, because if he's in and out of the lineup because you have so many guys that can fill that role and need to play, then you want to put a player in a situation. If a player wants to be in a situation where he's in the lineup every night. So, I think that's one that could happen. I think the JVR one's a little bit more unlikely. I think you have to retain some money, and if he's having a good year, you don't really want to ship him out. And sure, he's a guy just like a pro's pro that I think is a really good influence on young players to see how he takes care of his body, his sleep, his all of those things, and his preparation. I think his value goes beyond on the ice.
Yeah.
So I think that would be a little less likely. But with 1 year remaining on a deal after this one, yeah, he could get moved because it's a big hit.
I was thinking in the offseason, since his dollar amount, I think, comes out to be about $5 million, and his cap hit is $7 million.
That's attractive for teams, too.
Right. And that's why I thought you only have 1 year left. The guy's most likely going to give you 25 goals a year. And that's kind of what I was thinking with that. But I do agree with you overall. I don't sense they would move. The one thing I thought about today, and it's a player I don't like bringing this up with because I really like him, and I think obviously the team does too, but I go back to the Scott Lawton signing, a few months ago, and I think about the amount of money he's making and the value we could have got for him, probably a first-round pick, right, at the time last season. I don't think he's a redundant player necessarily, but I do think he's a guy we probably could have signed a free agent to play his role, a similar role. And you could have got a first, you could have moved that first in other positions, and maybe you wouldn't have been as stuck against the cap, and you would have a little more leverage in a ghost trade. Not that I think you would win that trade, obviously, looking at it, but that $3 million probably is just as valuable as Lawton is at this point. So I was thinking back to that. I don't like to think that way because he's going to play a big role for the team, but I was thinking about that if it was that necessary to hold on to Scott Lawton, even though, quite frankly, I think everybody loves him, including Claude Giroux, which I believe he's one of his better friends.
Yeah, I mean, to me, he's one of those guys that you have that is an important player, especially in multiple rounds of the playoffs.
For sure.
So I think that's part of the equation as well. So, but yeah, I mean, there's some variables here that Chuck can take advantage of in the season, even as a team that's doing well. He can take advantage of them. So, yeah, I think that's absolutely a possibility. Yeah.
And not that I want to see him move. I feel like I brought up the Albe Kubel thing, and I could tell people were like, no, you don't move him because he's tough and gritty. I'm like, yeah, but if I can play Wade Allison in his stead, and Wade Allison's got a higher ceiling, I'm most likely going to do it.
Yeah.
So let's move on to some staff news here. And I do want to talk about the Phantoms, though. Riley Armstrong and former Flyer. I think Riley Armstrong might have played for the Reading Royals. I don't know if that's...
The Coast.
Yep, he did. And then Jason Smith, who I definitely... had a short stint here with the Flyers, but was awesome personality-wise, for sure. The Gator will be assistant coaches for the Phantoms. I don't know enough about Armstrong, but I love the Jason Smith hiring. From what I understand, he also coached Ethan Sampson, who's a draft pick from this year. Shout out to Bill Meltzer
Prince
for that
George.
one. Yeah. So, yeah, what do you think about those additions?
I think they're good. I think Jason Smith is a really interesting one because he's a guy that, I mean, we know how he played the game, and he was a total warrior.
Yeah.
And even though, like you said, his time here was short, he was impressive. Yeah, I mean, he wasn't a great player, but he was a great leader. And I think Lappy had him in mind from the jump. I really do. And I think Lappy identified him, and talking to Ian, he was, he was looking for the right guy. He wasn't looking to make a hire quick. He was looking for the right guy. And I think he got one of those right guys in Jason Smith. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that new staff handles it, because, Scott Gordon's been down there for a while and did a really nice job with players and really had a good demeanor with players. Lappy's going to be different. They're not the same, type of guy. It's Lappy's first, kind of head job too. So he's got to figure out exactly who he is as a head coach, and there's a little bit of a period of adjustment to that. You got to be yourself, but also, as an assistant, you play the good cop a lot more, the communicator. As a head, it's not so much that. So we'll see how, that part plays out. But it's an important position down there to develop and get these guys ready for the NHL, because you have to be able to draft and develop in today's salary cap, and they're going to have to be good at it.
Yeah, totally. And just a memory I have of Gators playing, I believe he played in the playoffs with 2 separated shoulders. Just a guy who's relentless. And I think Lappy is also like that. And as you were talking, I was kind of thinking, and I don't want to compare him to Brindamore, but again, Lappy is a guy whose conditioning is like top notch, and even does it today. I know that for sure, that he still focuses on his conditioning after the game. And I feel like that is a big thing that's coming with these guys, is probably more, I don't want to say more accountability than Gordon, but it's a guys who are going to be, they're going to have high expectations for, your physical preparation coming into the season. Is that the sense that you get as well?
Yeah, I talked to Lappy about it when he first got hired, and I used the term when I talked to him of non-negotiables. He's like, it's so funny that he said that, because they're actually painting that on the wall right now. And as a coach, you have certain things like, okay, guys, here's our system, blah, 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 but there are certain things that are non-negotiable, and they're the things that you can control in a game that's full of variance. And one of those things is conditioning and how you prepare as a professional. This is no longer college. You're going to class, chasing girls and partying and playing hockey. This is now, you're playing for your livelihood with the best players in the world, and if you want to succeed, you've got to treat it like a job, because it is, and it's a great job. So control what you can control, and one of the things you can control is how you prepare and how you condition. And he's a big believer in that. I mean, he still does triathlons now. I mean, he is in unbelievable shape, and was as a player, and learned that as a player, that for him to stay in the league that long, he had to do those things. So I've always said this too, like, guys who weren't elite level talent players in the NHL make better coaches.
Yep.
Because they've had to work for everything they've gotten. Oftentimes, like the guys that are great players, they have a hard time articulating how they played the game, or how they saw the game, or how the game felt to them, because there was so much just instinct and raw God-given abilities there that they don't articulate it, because it just happened for them. Other guys had to work for it. So I think that that's going to be part of it. But the non-negotiables, getting in shape, playing hard, doing the right things, being smart, those are things you can control. And he's gonna be very hard on the guys about those elements. Show up and be ready to go, and be a pro. And if you can do that, then that's the part that you can control. The other part, we'll work with you. But those things that you can control are non-negotiable. They have to be at the top level.
Yeah, and that's music to my ears. And I think you know this as well as anybody, is the frustrating, and obviously, like you said in the beginning, right, with Fletcher, the slow starts, they're just not acceptable anymore. And I don't know what it is, because calling an NHL player lazy is ridiculous to me. But so I don't think it's laziness, but like I see it, okay, like you're at 100%. We need to go beyond that. We need to hit another gear where even if we're not the most talented team, we outplay everybody, every shift, as hard as we can. I mean, how else does Barry Trotz turn his teams from being pretty average to being exceptional? I mean, the level of talent usually is about the same, and then he just gets more out of them. We need to do that probably top down. And I think, just to name some of the other guys, Mike O'Connell, senior advisor, GM player development or player management, Nick Beverly, pro scout, was added. Yoakum Grumberg, yep, director of European scouting. Matt Bardsley, amateur scouting. Jacob I'm going to say this wrong. Herbert, assistant director of analytics, which I guess a lot of people will be happy about that. Dan Warnack will get a promotion, I believe, head and strength conditioning coach, which I think is kind of related there. And then Derek O'Connell will be his assistant strength and conditioning coach. So lots of personnel changes. I like that none of this was announced over the summer. I like that they really took their time here. And when people thought they were doing nothing, they obviously were building a very meticulous plan. What do you think about all the changes overall? Do you get the sense that this was, hey, we recognize our shortcomings and we're absolutely doing something about it this offseason?
Yeah, this was, okay, I've been here a couple of years now for Chuck, and we retain a lot of the people, but I have to do things the way I feel they should be done, and I think we can do better off the ice to make the on ice better. Mm-hmm. And so he's put people in positions, and he's been deep diving on all of this stuff for a while now. So, to see everything and all the changes that he's made is not shocking. Some of the guys that moved out are guys that their contract was up and they were hired by a previous GM, so they're being replaced. So that's normal attrition and addition. Mm-hmm. But overall, it's looking at everything and saying, how can we be better? How can we prepare better? How can we train better? How can we, for every element, so that when it goes on the ice, you've got every advantage. And they're important details that people look at and maybe don't understand all of the elements of what all of those names are that you bring. But the combination of all those and working smarter, not harder necessarily, mm-hmm. is the goal in mind with all that change.
Yeah, and I think it's good to see. I mean, sometimes you just got to change it up too and set new expectations. And we'll talk about it a little bit, but Jake Voracek leaving, I think, is one of the biggest changes that we've seen since the Mike Richards and Carter. Jeff Carter trades. Right? I mean, you're talking about a guy who led the team in points several times. Guy who's been here for, he had the largest contract outside of Giroux. This is a guy who's kind of face of the franchise. So there obviously is a very strong push here to change the identity of the team. Not completely, but more to evolve it, right? To take it, to find the points that frustrate not just the fan base, but the organization itself, and try to finally maybe adjust some of that. Because again, I don't know how long we've started poorly, but it's gone through 3 different coaches. I mean, you got to look.
It's been a while.
Right? It's not just the coach, right? And it's not just one player. It's got to be an organizational thing, and I don't know what it is. Like, I don't think there's any. Again, the idea of calling these people lazy is ridiculous to me. So I don't know what that element is, but I just find it interesting that there's finally kind of like this big overhaul.
Yeah, I think the big part of it is it's hard to change an identity of a slow starting team with the same people.
Yep.
You have to change, as the word Chuck used and I use, is dynamic. You had to change the dynamic because those slow starts were detrimental. You can't chase games in the league. And they chased far too many, whether it was in the playoffs, regular season, or whatever. I mean, we saw it this year. I mean, geez, they just got crushed in first periods. And then they would battle back. And, okay, tip of the cap, good job battling back. But that's not a way to have success. So you got to change that identity. And by changing a lot of key personnel is how you change the identity, because it puts everybody in an uncomfortable position. And I've always been a big believer that athletes need to be put in uncomfortable positions because discomfort adds urgency. So I think, like I talked to Kevin Hayes and Keith Yandel the other day, and I said, there's something about going to a new place as a player and going to drive to the rink the first, 3 weeks and not feeling comfortable with how I get there. I got to use Google Maps or my, GPS. Or when I get to the rink going, like, I don't know exactly where the bathroom is. Like, where do I go to the bathroom? Like, they're uncomfortable. Like, you're going, hey, where's the blah, blah, blah? Where's the bathroom? Where's the change? They don't feel comfortable because you haven't been doing it for years. So it feels new, and everything, there's an invigorated feeling that happens when you're in those positions. And if you couple that with winning, and that becomes infectious. I always thought that fun and winning and identity runs through a locker room, and having those new faces affect the faces that have been here. in a lot of ways, with a refreshing, feeling and with the group and everything. So I think that's part of the equation as well.
Yeah, no, really well said. And I like to think of it as uncomfortability is the catalyst for growth, right? And evolution. And I feel like that's what we're watching here. So I'm personally, I would say the fan base seems to be ignited for the first time in a while. And I'm a guy who wasn't desperate for change, but even I can't help but get excited by what I'm seeing. And I always like LePerriere. So, and I've heard him talk quite a bit, and I love his attitude. So for me, I'm and I like Scott Gordon too, but I'm hoping that kind of hard nose, that I'm big into conditioning as well. I think that's a killer for this team. And again, it's not that they're out of conditioning; it's that they're not in peak. They're not the best in the league. I want to be the most conditioned team in the league. That would be my goal.
I want to check that box off and go, this is not going to be a reason why we don't win.
Right.
We don't win.
Exactly. Exactly.
Conditioning, again, it's something you can control. So let's control all the controllables. And, the game's already, you're chasing around a vulcanized piece of rubber on 200 by 85 sheet, or 200 by 85 sheet of ice. So there's a lot of variables here. So let's control what we can control. And then, we lessen the burden of the things we can't control. Totally
agree. All right, let's move into some fun stuff. I do want to talk about the trades and the signings. So I do want to start with the Ryan Ellis trade. This is and I've said this several times already, but Ryan Ellis seems to be the biggest impact defenseman veteran we have brought in here. I don't want to say since Chris Pronger. He's a legend, but since Chris Pronger, but it reminds me more of when we brought over Kimmo Timonen, a guy who is a swing number one, maybe more of a number two, but can play a shutdown role, can play an offensive role, plays a two-way game. He's slightly undersized, but plays larger than his size. He's also right-handed, which is a big deal. He's also locked up 6 years, which I actually think, to counter a little bit what you said, I think that's actually why he was so expensive, because he's locked for $6 million a year, where if you look at the defensemen of his caliber, they're getting a lot more than that, though I do agree it goes into 36. But I think it's a very controlled number. I do think people disagree with me on this. I still think we paid a high cost for him, moving a former second overall pick and moving Phil Myers, who's a guy who's, I would say, a first-round pick caliber guy, to bring into your organization. But a move that I think filled a desperate need for us, top pairing and veteran, and not just an average guy, a guy who's upper echelon as well. And it's an investment in Provorov and Sanheim and Hart, right, to play a better defensive game all around. I think raises their confidence. The likelihood of messing them up gets reduced. So what do you think about Ryan Ellis coming over here?
Yeah, I agree with what you said. He's a guy that can bring them all the elements that Matt Niskanen brought and more, frankly. And we saw the effect of Niskanen in just one season. Yep. And to have that, I knew that, and I was saying this a lot during the season because I knew they wanted to fix the top pairing problem, not only as the number one need, but also for much longer. It wasn't going to be a Band-Aid. They wanted to find a cure, not the Band-Aid. And a Band-Aid would have been 2 more years of a player, that's like 33, that's got like 2 good years left and can play alongside. But they wanted to fix the problem for a longer term than that. And a lot of the talk during the season was about Ekholm. I had received word in early March that while he was a fit, he wasn't a great fit. It wasn't the perfect fit. And if they were going to do something long-term like that, they were going to do something that was damn near close to perfect, not a good fit, but not perfect, because he was a left shot, could play the right side, blah, blah, blah. But we know the value they put on right side, right shot. So it made all the sense in the world. And I think that this deal, the groundwork for it was laid back at the trade deadline. That's when everything kind of began for the Ryan Ellis thing to come to fruition. Eventually, David Poile decided, hey, I'm not going to sell. We got a chance to make the playoffs. They did. And Ellis played really good down the stretch. And then they got in the all-season, but they still have the same problem. They still need to shed some salary from their D-core, and you knew they wanted to get a D-man on a cheaper contract with upside in return to replace the player. And that's exactly what they did with Phil. And, Phil's a tough one because he is a great, great athlete. He's a freak athlete, but he doesn't think the game well. There was one game that I remember freaking out on the post-game show about it. about him matadoring the inside of the ice. And, he's against the Flyers bench as the team's entering the zone, giving up the middle of the ice, and you just don't do that. You play inside the dots, which means you play in the middle of the ice, you give them the outside. And it led to 2 goals. And, those things can't happen. Sometimes when he would activate offensively, he'd get caught in the offensive zone. Just didn't have the awareness to peel back out and be, okay, I'm a defenseman. And he would rely on that skating ability to get back into a play. And at the NHL level, you can do that sometimes, not all the time. So he's pretty raw as a player still. But I think Ellis, the trickle-down effect is it puts everybody in their proper spot. I talk about slotting all the time.
Huge.
Yeah, having guys where they should be playing is as important as who's playing the position. So I think that's a big element of it. Adding Ellis, not having to pull other guys up and have this variance for Provorov's partner. And so you need consistency, because you saw it last year. I think it was a game where they put Ghost on the top pair with Provorov. And this is nothing against Ghost. This is just the fact that Provorov had a different partner seemingly shift after shift. And he's exiting his zone. He's coming up to the strong side into a forecheck, and he goes to throw the puck to his partner, but he's got to look because he's not sure where his partner is. You can't look. You have to know. And the only way you know is through consistency in partner. And you know, okay, I'm just going to drop a backhand off here behind the net, and I know that's where my partner's going to be. Or I'm going to come across the ice to the weak side, and I know that I'm throwing it to a spot. I don't need to look. I know he's there. That's what you need. And that's what Ryan Ellis will bring for not 1 year, but many years.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's so well said. And that's what I meant by an investment. Like you're, and I'll talk about it. I want to bring up Risto next, but you have a guy at Provorov right now, and I'll bring this up now. I mean, you look at the contracts for Werenski, for Jones.
Holy.
Monster contracts. And we have
Dougie Hamilton.
Yeah, Dougie Hamilton, which, quite frankly, I think they're all overpaid. Not significantly, but the market has kind of changed. And you look at Provorov's cost, and in my opinion, on the open market, this guy gets close to 9. So now the Flyers have this guy who is their number 1 defenseman, and you're letting him, I don't want to say rot or anything like that, but look at the partners that he's had. Outside of Niskanen, nobody has filled that void, and that was only for a year. So how can you continue to let that investment get punished? Yeah. And I think that this is an that's why you move Phil Myers and Nolan Patrick. It's like, are you going to let your defense fall apart where it creates problems for other players in the lineup, for forwards, for your goaltender, which I do want to talk about Hart and Jones at the end. How many bad games can Hart take, right, before his confidence
before you break him?
Right, exactly. It's like you
and look at Martin Jones.
Yeah,
he was broken.
Exactly. I want to talk about them last, but absolutely, that's exactly what I want to talk about. But let's get into the next controversial guy, and Rasmus Ristolainen. And I want to bring up a tweet here by Jordan Hall, and I think it's an interesting tweet. And this is a guy who's controversial. Maybe I'm crazy. I think I understand the cost is high. It was high, but this is a former top 10 pick. He's a guy who's played 24 minutes and 45 seconds a night. That's top 10 in the league. Ivan Provorov is ranked at 13th with 24.08, and then Ryan Ellis 23.47. Now, Rasmus Ristolainen, I would say, is the worst of those 3 guys and playing the most amount of minutes. I see a guy like that. I see, okay, you're being overplayed. Bill Meltzer, I believe, brought this up. You're throwing him to the Wolves at 19, which is kind of what we did to Provorov, even though Provorov has handled it better. This is a guy who probably is never a number 1 defenseman, but definitely a top 4 guy. I don't really care about analytics, especially I do in the context of the same team, but when you're moving him from team to team, in my opinion, it's a brand new clean slate. So what do you think about Rasmus Ristolainen? Are you as concerned as other people? Because I'm very excited for what he brings, especially a number 4 role on this team. I think playing him 22 minutes a night, 21 minutes a night is vastly more appropriate than what he's being played right now.
Well, not only that, but you're playing him who you're playing him against.
Absolutely.
In matchups more often, yeah. I think is a big part of it as well. And look, I've kind of gone on this rant a bunch since the addition.
Yeah.
Rasmus Ristolainen, his analytics aren't good. And analytics are part of the equation. I get it. And I value them to a degree.
To a degree, right.
But the analytics lack context. They lack a lot of elements of what a player can bring to the table. And he's a guy that brings an element that they did not have of accountability on the ice. Now, he's not a great fighter. I'm not asking the guy to fight, but I need a guy on the ice that's going to absolutely be a pain in the rear end. I mean, he termed it that way. This isn't me terming it. I mean, when he was on in his press conference, he said that I'm kind of a pain in the ass to play against. And he's right. He is a pain in the ass.
I remember him that way. Yeah,
I mean, when I had him on Flyers Daily, he said, I hope no kids are listening, but I like to be a piece of shit out there. That's what he said.
I do remember that.
And people loved it. But the analytics community wants to call him Andrew McDonald. And I find it absurd. Yes, some analytics kind of match with Andrew McDonald, and they're not good. But find me in Andrew McDonald's Hockey DB page where he had 4 straight seasons with more than 40 points as a defenseman. You won't find it. And they say, well, that's because he played on the power play. Okay, so because the guy was good enough to play on the power play, that's a strike against him? That seems really dumb to me.
Doesn't make any sense. Just
and it's, look, the analytics community and the religious analytics people, they're almost, it's like eye test versus analytics, and there's some people that hover somewhere in the middle. But what they want to do is they want to create certainty in an uncertain game. And they want to do that saying, well, this is predictable performance based on these numbers, but it doesn't hold true. I remember last year the Flyers got the crap kicked out of them 8-3 by the Rangers. And one of the analytics guys put up a tweet that said the Flyers actually out-Corsied the Rangers. I said, that should tell you all you need to know about your analytics.
Exactly.
That yeah, they're good and they can be a talking point and they can be a supplement, but they can never be the meal. They can only be like green beans on a dish or broccoli. They can't be a steak. You know what I mean? 100%. They can't stand on their own because your numbers, predictable numbers, said the Flyers out-Corsied them and they should win that game if they played it, if they had that Corsi in 10 games in a row. They got beat 8-3. So, I don't care what the number said. The hockey has got so many variables. And I've read this quote a bunch of times. I'm not going to attribute it to the guy who said it to me because he asked me not to. Mm-hmm. But I was talking to him about analytics and about Risto and what he brings and the fact that he's a big physical presence and about guys like Tom Wilson who bring that element of accountability on the ice for the opposition, something they didn't have last year. And this player, and this is a really good player. This is a high-end Flyers NHL player. It's not like a guy that's been here for a cup of coffee. And he said, hockey is simple until you over-evaluate it. There's no analytics for fear when you're on the ice because you can have all the skills in the world, but they are easily taken away with fear. Tough teams have more room to make plays. And he said, makes sense? Don't quote me on this, haha. So, and it's true. I talked to Danny Briere on draft night at the Flyers practice facility about Risto and said, what is a player like Danny's an undersized guy, right? And people tried to push him around and, he an offensive creative player, really gifted skill-wise. I said, what does a player like that do for you? And he's like, oh, my God, it makes all the difference in the world. It helps me. He's a defenseman on my team, and he helps me a tremendous amount as an offenseman. Because he says, if I'm down in front of the net and I'm getting hammered, I'm getting the crap kicked out of me, and then I go down into the defensive zone and I see their players in front of the net and they're just standing there, pulling up a lawn chair with a margarita, and there's no accountability in front of the net. He goes, that's incredibly deflating to us offensively. And it's easy for their players. It can't be easy. And I just think of Ristolainen as a guy, imagine him in a 7-game series. He hasn't been in the playoffs because he was in Buffalo. Imagine how much of a pain in the rear end he'll be in a 7-gamer. Woo. And so, I'm sorry. I mean, he's a polarizing player, but he brings an element that they sorely needed. He's a freak of nature athlete. I mean, he's a skilled player. And I think he's going to be in a situation that is much more suitable for what he is as a player in the NHL, not where he was drafted, but what he is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's very well said. And about the AMAC comment, and I don't actually hate AMAC like everybody else does. The Flyers' defense was worse last year than they were with AMAC. I just want to point that out to people.
He became the poster boy because of the contract.
Just because of the contract. But he wasn't a physical player. Like, comparing the two together is ridiculous.
I mean, the guy led the league in block shots.
Yeah, and if you look at it's true. If you look at that Gudis trade, he had great analytics that year, and Niskanen didn't. Who was the better player? It was clear. I remember people were even like, "Oh, is Niskanen?" It's pretty much an even trade here. I remember people were saying that. I was like, "What are you guys talking about?" I was like, "This is when analytics." Yeah, it's like, but who cares? He was fantastic. You saw the impact that he did, and he was a very physical player also. And I like analytics for measurement, but it is definitely secondary, far secondary to an eye test, in my opinion.
Well, they did the same thing when Seth Jones was the conversation.
Yeah.
They're saying, well, analytically, he's like a third pair defenseman.
Yeah,
it's like, if you've ever watched Seth Jones and thought he was a third pair defenseman,
that's insane.
Then delete your account, because that's absurd. Yes. So, I mean, is he a great number one? Probably not, but is he one of the top 10 right side defensemen in the NHL? Yes. And I mean, did you watch that 5 overtime game a couple of years ago against the Tampa Bay Lightning? Or did you watch that series? Like, I know that was a couple of years ago, but you also have to account for the team that you play on, because when a team is crap, it is hard to have good numbers because you're trying to do too much. When you're bereft of talent, the talent is trying to overcompensate for that, and oftentimes it does lead to bad analytical numbers. So, and look, coming out of Buffalo for Ristolainen, look at the guys that have left Buffalo. I mean, that team has swallowed really good players. I mean, Ryan O'Reilly didn't want to play hockey anymore. That's how bad it was.
I know.
And look at that guy.
Look at Hall, who went
2 goals
overnight.
Yep, he had 2 goals in Buffalo. I mean, I don't know if Skinner would be better somewhere else, but playing in Buffalo doesn't help.
Hopefully they get that resolved, because it's like a black hole of hockey, and it is
shame.
Important. It is
good market.
Yeah, and I remember you were talking about Danny Briere. Like, I remember that team, right? Mm-hmm. Like, that was a fierce competitive team, and Danny Briere, a small guy, he was nasty to play against, and like that's something I want to make sure continues to happen here. And
by the way, since Danny's left, the last time they won a playoff series, 2007. Last year, Danny was there. Coincidence?
Yeah. No, not at all. I love Danny Briere. He was fantastic. All right, let's move on to the next big trade, and I'm going to ignore the Ghost trade because that's not that fun to talk about, and we kind of get it.
Well, right. I mean, there's one thing about Ghost is
go ahead.
He was an analytics darling.
Yeah.
But he was a net negative player. Yeah, he was a net negative player. People wanted to tell me, he's not that bad defensively. Bullshit. He sucked defensively.
Well, all you have to do is play, and I love Gossesbear's offensive game, but all you have to do is shut him down physically, and you eliminate him from the game.
Yeah, he was a really easy player to adjust to.
If you're a very tough team, he's a much more tenable player to have in your lineup.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not, which we weren't,
I just think there were so many misconceptions about him as a player too. Like, people would say, they'd ask me, like, why don't we move him to the wing? He's really fast. He'd be good on him. I was like, oh my God, are you watching the same guy I'm watching?
Dynamic.
First of all, the guy is not fast. Never was. Shifty, yes.
Yes.
Never fast. Never a fast straight line skater. Not a great skater. Board battles, one of the worst on the team. I mean, couldn't win board battles. Wasn't strong enough. Was a shifty. I always referred to him as a dramatic player, but not a great player. And I received a lot of crap about him because even when he first came up, I did not believe that he would be a guy that would be good. I thought he had a horseshoe in his butt and was just playing great, and things were awesome. But I just didn't see sustainability in his game. People were like, "You're crazy," blah blah blah. And I just didn't see it, because I saw a guy that just got in the defensive zone, just got owned. And Bill Meltzer brought up the line one night. He said a lot of times when the puck came across their own blue line, it was like you're playing a man down when he was on the ice, and it was. It wasn't his game at the NHL level. And offensively, you could, if he was going really good offensively, you could live with it. But there was only really 2 seasons where that happened, where his offense could outweigh the deficiencies everywhere else. And to me, he was a net negative player. I
think if he goes to Arizona, and I don't know what their situation is going to be this year, it's not going to be pretty. But if he probably will get points there. But if he ever gets played with I'm just going to say a guy like Shea Weber, for instance, right, who can really make up for his deficiencies. I think he could be a very good complementary offensive player. But what's
to me, you can't ever put him on the ice with a guy like Shea Weber. He's the third pairing D guy and a PP specialist. That's it.
Well, at this point, yeah. So how do you explain the couple years that he did have where he was highly effective? Do you think it was just they didn't have the book on him, or?
Well, I mean, the third year where he had the 65 points, they had a book on him at that point, but he just had a great season. Things just snowballed for me. He had a great year. He wasn't good defensively, but he was so good offensively that it masked everything.
I think
so. But I mean,
Carlson's
65 points
like that too,
points.
don't you think? Eric Carlson.
I was when he was a free agent. I said the Flyers shouldn't touch him, and I received a lot of criticism for that too because analytics guys love him, you know. And I mean, what an albatross that dude has been for San Jose. That contract, it's great. Not to mention what they gave up.
Yeah, no, and I want to talk about that when we get to Jones. So let's push forward a little bit here. So let's talk about Atkinson real quick. This trade, I haven't seen anybody upset about it from the Flyers side, understandably so. I think Jake is going to have a pretty big year with the Blue Jackets, especially if he plays in the right role. He's going to be probably their go-to playmaker on the offensive side. So I expect his numbers to stay high. You know, he led the team in points last year. I think they're going to struggle a little bit as a team, but I think he's going to do well. Cam Atkinson brings a lot of things that this team hasn't had. Outside of losing some size on the wing, we do get a gritty guy who's a shoot-first guy, which we haven't had. He's a guy who's really good in tight, better than Voracek. He's definitely less of a perimeter player, and obviously brings that personality, which everybody loves already, but it's clearly infectious as well. What do you think about Atkinson? Do you see any downside to the trade?
Yeah, I mean, there's a notion amongst Flyer fans that Jake is a horse bleep hockey player, and he's not.
He's a good player.
I've said this, that if they dropped me down from Mars and I said, let me tell me about this Jake Voracek to Flyer fans, and based on all the information I would get from them, I would think that he is a guy that's got 200 points in the NHL in 10 years with the Flyers, not 600. But so he's a player that incurs some risk in his game because he's a play driver and an offensive creative guy. I don't think he's lost a step at all north of 30. So he's a good player, but Atkinson does bring something different. So while you look at them both, maybe if you looked at them both analytically, Voracek is the guy that is better. But when you have to look at fit. And they have too many pass first guys. I don't know how many times last year we saw a 3-on-1 and come away and the Flyers didn't end up with a shot on goal. You know, you get 3-on-1 break and they didn't even get a shot because everybody's like, here, no, you shoot, no, you shoot, no, you shoot, dropping the puck off and passing it. You need somebody that you're going to put the puck on their stick, you're going to put it on a tee, he's going to slam it home. And that's what Atkinson does. So, and some people say, well, his 41-goal season or his 35 were a result of playing with Panarin. Okay.
Well, we got Giroux.
Yeah, I mean, you got a pretty good playmaker in Giroux that leads the league in assists since 2010 that can put it on a tee with the best of them and has never played with an elite scorer. So I think the fit will be there. And, yeah, his excitement level is just off the charts. I mean, he's got so many connections here already with Kevin Hayes from the BC days and his brother Jimmy Hayes and Keith Yandel by proxy. And then you look at a guy like Scott Hartnell, who's in the media here. Their families are best friends, so he's so excited to be here. And he sees what's happening in Columbus. Like, he's 32, and he's going, all right, I want to win. And they're clearly in a rebuild mode. We've already lost basically an all-star team over the last 5 years of guys that said, I don't want to be here. So I got to go somewhere else, and I think he's going to fit in beautifully here.
Yeah, I think so too. Do you see, and I think it's way too early to project this, but do you see, because he could play with Kevin Hayes too, but do you see do you see that maybe he gets slotted in with Giroux and Couturier? He's better defensively than Voracek, I would say. So that does kind of make it a little easier on Giroux. It's a little, but could he be like the Travis Konechny on that line?
He could be. The only thing that would hold that back is that he's also a penalty killer. And if they're using Giroux as a penalty killer, you don't want to use the whole line.
True. That's a good point.
And PK situations. So that's the only thing where you break that up a little bit. So, but I think he's a guy that could be on the number one power play for sure.
Sure.
I think your four forwards on the number one power play are going to be Couturier, Giroux, a guy like Atkinson, and probably JVR in that front.
Yep.
And then your second power play you're using. And then on your point, you can either go with probably Yandel and put Ellis on second PPs to lessen his load because you want him 5-on-5 and PK more. And you don't need Yandel as much 5-on-5, and you can really take advantage of what he brings offensively on that power play. So, yeah, I think that, and then, Travis Konechny's on that second power play. Does a guy like Wade Allison sniff a power play? Maybe.
Probably, I would say.
Yeah, so Farabee is another guy that you PP with on power play too. So there's a lot of different options here and a lot of different looks now that you can. When you have a shoot first guy, you can throw a lot more looks. So you have a great net front guy in JVR. You know that part of the equation. What you do on the outside to get the puck there to the house is now very different.
Yeah.
Without Jake and having a guy that can pound it home with a good shot like Atkinson.
And that's why you heard those Tarasenko rumors, right? I think it's an element we definitely needed. And it's interesting you brought up the power play point because the one thing about this D is now you have Ristolainen, who's a puck mover. You have Sanheim, who's a puck mover. You have Yandel, who's a puck mover. You have Provorov, who's a puck mover. And you have Ryan Ellis. Really outside of Braun and I'm going to ignore York and Zamula because they're both puck movers as well. Outside of Braun and Morin, everybody on here has an opportunity to play a power play, in my opinion. So I think it's very interesting, and I'm looking forward to seeing how they solve that problem.
Yeah, it's a good problem to have.
Yeah, a great problem to have. So let's talk about Yandel. You just brought it up. I want to talk about free agency, and this is what I was talking about. He went big with the trades. They're high risk to some degree. You're not high risk. Let's say they're expensive moves. And then he went cheap and conservative, and I love the way he balanced out free agency. And I wouldn't be surprised if we even bring in somebody else. And I'm going to ignore Glendening from now, even though I think he's a good addition as well. But Nate Thompson, obviously, and we can do these guys together, and we'll talk about Jones. Nate Thompson, a guy we're bringing back. I think this perfect example of something this team missed last year. Just a workhorse. He will play through anything. He will play every shift. He will be tenacious. He'll block shots. We can finally stop putting Bunneman or a kid in a role that primarily should be a veteran guy who can really take punishment. So Nate Thompson comes back, and then Keith Yandel at under $1 million. I mean, I don't think could be a better signing. So what do you think about those two additions?
Yeah, I like them both. Nate made sense to me, too, because he fit in here last time, and he brings some veteran leadership, some grit, can take some key face-offs, can kill penalties. He's a guy you can drop out of the lineup if you need to for a few games in a condensed schedule. It's an 82 this year, but it is condensed because of the Olympic break, so that's part of it, too. And I think they're looking at that. And then Yandel, to me, like I brought him up, Bill and I talked about him
prior.
I guess the day before he signed. I brought him up, and I'm just like, this just makes too much sense. Like, it made so much sense. On the ice, off the ice, financially, I brought up with Bill, he's just bought out. He's not looking for the big payday. He's looking for a good situation. And, it's a home run to me, the Yandel one, because, he can bring that power play specialist back there. He's a great first pass out of the zone defenseman and great vision as a player. Obviously, he puts himself physically in great shape. The guy hasn't missed a game in 922 or 921, huge whatever it is.
Yep.
So he's a pro, but he's also a guy that will keep it loose. He's a absolute hilarious guy. And I think that's a big thing. There was a malaise in that locker room. There was a predictability and a lack of dynamic. Hayes brought that in year one, and we lauded him for it because he had fun. And Hayes and Jans together are going to be off the charts, and that does a lot. People go, "Well, it's goofy. How does that help you win games?" Well, what it does is it just keeps everything loose. You don't overthink. In an 82-game condensed schedule, it's tough, man. You got to be able to go to the rink and have fun. And it's a job, yeah, but and Jans obviously treats it like a job because you don't play that many games in a row without treating it like a job. But I imagine that on the bench during a game, it's an absolute riot with him there.
Yeah. Because
he's so quick and he's so funny and he keeps a game loose and doesn't let, guys get in their own head and stuff. I think those guys are important. I really do. So I think that both signings were savvy and not expensive.
Yep.
to get what you're getting from those two players at the cap hit that you've added is
amazing.
Should almost be illegal.
Yeah. And I think, and again, I'm saying this way early right now, assuming that things go well with this. I mean, if this team rebounds after the moves that Fletcher has made, I mean, you got to have to consider him for GM of the Year candidacy. Just even a pickup like this, and I mean this honestly, and maybe I'm overblowing it, but getting Yandle at under $1 million after a buyout in a situation where you didn't even really need him, he's more of like icing on the cake. Like I mentioned, all those other guys who can play on the power play. You even have Cam York, and you're still bringing in a former assistant captain, a former 50-point producer on the back end, a guy who used to be a number 2, like a really good number 2 in the NHL. I mean, I just think like these are smart moves. You went aggressive, and then you also went conservative with your, because he could have gone, this is what I was saying in the beginning, could have gone full blast and made a bad signing in free agency. I don't see any of that here. I see
there was also there was also a fiscal responsibility that had to be weighed here, not only now going forward because of the Couturier contract, the Giroux contract that are coming up, and guys heading into very important years financially. So, I mean, these were savvy moves, and there's not a lot of risk because they're short deals, too. So if they didn't work out for whatever reason, nothing ventured, nothing gained. But, yeah, they were smart moves, and, like, I'm really excited to see Yandle. I mean, basically, you've taken the best strength of Shane Gostisbehere and got a guy that's better at it.
At a fraction.
You've taken the biggest weakness of Shane Gostisbehere and got a guy who's better at that end. And you've got a leader. You've got a guy that, I mean, he's going to keep the locker room loose and have fun and all those things. So to me, and by the way, at $3.5 million cheaper. So to me, that's the home run. That's the element that makes it the home run.
Yeah, and that's where you got to think about that ghost trade. Everybody likes to combine it with the Ristolainen trade. I think you're just trying to make things worse on yourself. Like you're enjoying
complicating it.
Yeah, you're complicating things. This is your ghost trade. It's we moved him out, we did all that, and then we got Yandle to replace him for a fraction of the cost.
Yep,
and
exactly.
Brings the veteran leadership, so I love that. So let's talk about the last player here, and then we'll wrap it up. So this is the most, in my opinion, the most controversial, though I don't think, I like what you said earlier. We mentioned the San Jose Sharks. Martin Jones comes over here. Now, I do want to say, in the beginning, Martin Jones was excellent in San Jose when they were good. As their game started to decline, their defensive game for sure, when their leadership started leaving as well, his numbers went way down. I don't think he's a number 1 goalie. I don't think he's an exceptional goalie, but I think he's an adequate and probably an average NHL goalie at this point. I think it's a decent signing at a very low risk. I do see where people are like, he's a little fragile mentally, but again, we know Kim Dillabaugh is here. He probably vouched for him as well. What do you think about Jones coming over, and what do you think about the tandem and the dynamic between Hart, the young goaltender who had a bad year, in my opinion, due to terrible team defense mostly that led to it spiraling on him, and Jones going through something similar at an older age, and the dynamic between the two of them?
Well, yeah, I mean, the environment, it's the word I always use whenever I talk about goalies, like I have to bring up environment. And the environment in San Jose the last 3 years was hideous. I mean, hideous. His numbers are below average, but overall, if you look at those 3 years combined, he actually outperformed his environment. I mean, his expected save percentage last year was .885 based on quality of shot and quality of opportunity, and he ended up with an .896. So he actually outperformed the environment, and the environment there was just no structure, so many odd man rushes, chances off the rush, rebound attempts, cross slot line passes, east-west plays, all of them. I mean, they were hideous in all those categories, and it broke his game down because as a goalie, you need that structure, that predictability of structure to play within yourself, and then you get away from it because you have to at some point. And last year, at the beginning of the year, from what I understand, talking to Kevin Woodley, was that he brought a lot of that structure back, but eventually with a lack of practice time, a condensed schedule, and poor environment again, it broke down on him again. So, yeah, they're hoping that there's a bit of a reclamation project here, working with Kim again, who was with him in L.A., and even prior to him getting to the Kings, he was working with him in that system. So that's part of the equation. And I got to look at, initially I was a bit shocked by it and taken back by the deal. But upon further review, I'm looking, okay, well, what were the other options, Who were the other guys? But Bernier got overpaid in New Jersey because their cap situation allowed them to do so, which is why they landed Dougie Hamilton as well. So they could outpace the market and outpay the market, so they couldn't go there.
And just
for a
real
guy
quick,
like Bernier.
I'm sorry to cut you off, but even Bernier, prior to the good season he had in Detroit, I mean, his numbers were also very down prior to there. And Detroit played better.
Not his advanced numbers, though.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, his adjusted numbers based on environment weren't. They were actually outperformed. So he last 3 years, he's been pretty good. But I wouldn't have been comfortable going to the number that New Jersey went to for him in this situation. I'm a little shocked they did, considering they have Mackenzie Blackwood. And I'm wondering what that dynamic will be like. Because when you're paying a goalie that much money that you're paying Bernier, you got to play him a good amount. And I don't know that you want to shelter Blackwood as much as that kind of would lead me to believe they will. So that's part of it. And then, I mean, a lot of people wanted Holtby, but a lot of people remember Holtby from when he won the Cup. Not Holtby since Barry Trotz left the Capitals, and not Holtby for what he was in Vancouver, which was a goalie that totally lost his confidence, was not a great tandem guy when he wasn't the starter. I got a lot of intel on him through some people I trust, and that would not have been the right guy. And a lot of people said, well, he didn't want to come east, that's why he didn't sign with the Flyers. That's not what I heard. That he didn't want to come back to the East Coast, which is why he ended up in Dallas. What I heard was that there were several red flags in him on and off the ice that they didn't want to bring him east. So I haven't put out that refuting the people that have had that report, but that's not the report that I heard. They talked about him. They checked in on him, but there were red flags that made them say, this is not even an option, a viable option, beyond just what he can do on the ice. So, you got to look at where you're going at that point. And, the big thing's going to be, how does Jones bring that structure back into his game? And when he's called upon, if either Carter's struggling at some point, a condensed schedule at some point, and he's got to play a good amount of games if he's hurt or struggling, then how is he going to perform? And to me, that's going to be the big question mark on really judging the signing, because it's so important. You can't have the backup goalie sink in your season because he can't stop pucks. And Brian Elliott was good when he was here, and better than his numbers would belie.
Agreed.
But you just couldn't play him a lot because of his age. And with Vasilevsky down in Tampa, that's a perfect situation for Moose, and best of luck to him. But Jones is a guy that's younger, that can handle a little bit more workload, and if need be, but he's going to have to stop pucks. He's going to have to play better. He's going to have to play with structure. And frankly, the Flyers' defense, I can sit there and I can rip Vancouver's environment. The Flyers' environment last year was hideous. They were 30th in the NHL, and San Jose's was 31st. So neither of them were good. Neither goalie's going to have a good season unless that environment's better. And that's just the fact of the matter. A goalie can only do so much. He can outperform his environment, but when it's as poor as it's been in San Jose and Philadelphia last year, you're not going to survive it. Eventually, your game is going to break down because it has to.
Yeah, no, well said. And how do you feel? How do you feel about the three beyond Carter Hart? We have Ersan, who's new, coming over, right? But also maybe the best of the three, and has already played against men for a while and succeeded very well there. You have Sandstrom, who's coming off a pretty good year in the AHL, and then Ustimenko, who lost a year, but also had a great year prior to his injury. Do you feel comfortable or confident that any of those guys can play a number 3 role?
Maybe Sandstrom at this point. I don't feel comfortable with the other guys. It's not enough there yet. Sandstrom started to get his game together last year. I mean, he had a really hard time adjusting to the smaller surface here in North America as opposed to playing on a big sheet of ice, which is a far different game. It's a much different game. I mean, you can catch pucks here from anywhere in the offensive zone. In that game, it's a lot more development of play. So the read is a lot different. But he seemed to adjust last year with some consistency playing over here. So the beginning of this year will be really important. But I mean, I think if you need a third guy, there are guys out there. If you don't feel comfortable with him just yet, but how that plays out, I mean, if you're down to your third guy, you're probably in a bad situation.
Yeah.
Unless you just need a game or two. So, It's like quarterback. When you get to your third guy, you're like, oh man, are we really pinning our hopes here? You're really in a tough spot.
Yeah, and I would be interested to see if the Flyers do bring in an additional veteran, like a guy in his 30s or something, at some point.
Yeah,
to play
if need be, I could see that happening.
Yeah, I could see it as well. Okay, so here's my final question for you: are the Flyers better?
Good question. It's the $100,000 question.
Yeah,
but I can't answer it. On paper, yeah, they're better. They fit better. They have elements that they sorely needed to, holes to fill and boxes to check, whether that's the top pairing right side, right shot defenseman to limit offensive, top lines of the opposition, which shredded them this year, or whether that's adding some toughness and grit and accountability with a guy like Rasmus, or, a good power play specialist in Yandel, or a shoot first guy in Atkinson, and the dynamic change and all of that stuff. But ultimately, it doesn't mean anything until we see it on the ice. I've gotten caught up in valuing a team or overvaluing a team on paper in all of Philadelphia sports too many times, and been like, okay, just because it's different doesn't mean it's better. Sure. The only way we're going to know that is based on how they play, how they're used, how they buy in, and most importantly, this is the most important element to me, is how quickly they identify, or how quickly they develop their identity. Because last year was a team without an identity, and a team without an identity in pro sports is a loser.
Yep.
So you have to develop an identity. You have to know what you are. You have to be it every night, and they got to develop that identity. A couple of years ago, they didn't lose back-to-back games in the whole second half of the season until they got to the second round of the bubble against the Islanders. Since like January 3rd until, late August or whatever it was last year. So they have to forge an identity. It's got to be organic. And it can't just be, hey, we're going to be this and say it. It has to actually be it. What that is going to be the biggest question mark to me. So you got buckets and buckets of character that was brought in, and leadership and personality. So I think those things are great. But again, we don't know how teams mix until you put them on the ice together against other NHL teams. So, and in a condensed schedule again. I can't wait for it to get started. I'm ready. I'm dying here, and trying to wait this next 75 days out.
It's awesome.
It's like, let's get going. We kind of seen the off season now. Let's just kind of strap in and go. But we've got 75 days. We've got a little while left, but it's not that far off. It'll be here before we know it, and I'll be going, oh man, why did I wish the season was here so quick? So I don't have a day off, but it's going to be fascinating. And it's exciting because it's not going to be the same.
Yeah, and I think we need that change. I think the Flyers. Again, I'm always called an optimist. Just if you look at what they put on paper, I actually think they were vastly more talented than they played last year, as you can see by the previous year, where they really only lost Matt Niskanen of being an impact player. Maybe they lost some character in the room, but even that.
Pitlick too.
Yeah, but again, Pitlick and Niskanen, it's not a monumental change to your organization. We've changed more now. They should have been better than what they played last year.
Totally
they should have been better. So now with the additions, I can't help but expect better at this point.
Yeah, Matt Niskanen wasn't Drew Doughty in his prime, and Tyler Pitlick wasn't, Mike Richards in his prime.
Right.
So it's not like they lost irreplaceable pieces. They didn't.
Right.
So, what happened last year was a snowball effect. And one of the things that Chuck's had to figure out this offseason was how much of what happened last year was COVID-related, how much of it was player-related, how much of it was preparation-related, how much of it was coaching-related. There was all these different elements that they had to consider in determining, okay, who's part of the solution and who's not.
Yeah.
Not necessarily part of the problem. I don't think Jake was part of the problem.
Right.
But I don't think he was the solution. They needed a dynamic change. And you need to change huge personalities to change the dynamic off the ice, too. And they did that. Like, Shane was a big presence here. Gostisbehere. Jake was obviously a huge presence here.
Yep.
So, a lot has changed. And, again, Chuck's messaging to kind of bring it full circle, I think, is really important. That what happened Chuck said at the trade deadline, what's happened this year is unacceptable. You can say that all you want, but if you don't, your actions don't show it, that it was unacceptable, your words don't mean anything. He said it was unacceptable, and his actions this offseason have proven that he believes it. And he wasn't going to accept this, and they made a lot of significant change to make sure what happened last year does not happen again.
Yeah, well said. Well said. All right, well, thank you again for doing this. Anything that you want to give maybe let our audience, I mean, you have a larger audience, but maybe let people know anything upcoming, anything that you're working on that you want to give a shout out to?
Tomorrow on Wednesday, I'm not sure when this is coming out, but I'll have Hayes and Yandel on Flyers Daily together.
Awesome. August 4th.
Which will be, I think we'll probably see some video of this one too,
cool.
Beyond just the teaser. We may release the full video just so you kind of see the guys. Usually we don't release the entire video, but those two, and then I have a bunch of stuff. I had Sam Moran, I think it's going to come up on Friday. I talked to him last week.
Awesome.
Darryl Williams, the new Flyers assistant coach who replaces Ian LaPerriere, who worked with AV in both Vancouver and with the Rangers. And we're talking to Chuck Fletcher coming up and Elaine Vigneault. And so, there's a lot coming up on Flyers Daily, and it's been cool. It's been a lot of stuff to get into. It's weird because I enjoy parts of the off-season where I can have like these deep dive conversations and stuff. Because during the season, like, you're reacting to games, you're previewing games. There's so much happening at light speed. In the off season, you can take a step, a breath back, and I just love talking about hockey, right? I mean, like, I'm such a dork. Like, I'll go to my local rink here, Iceline in Westchester, and I'll go watch a U18 showcase of kids all over the country just to watch it. Like, these aren't kids that are going to the NHL, but I just like to go watch the game. Like, last weekend, I was on the ice all weekend for training camp for my son. I coach my son's U16 team, his midget team. So we were on the ice all weekend at the rink, and, we had practice Friday, 2 Saturday, 2 Sunday, did the whole thing in between practices and everything. And I just love the game, so I love talking about it. And, the off season, you're anticipating the regular season coming, but I do enjoy the conversations, in the off season to be able to look at some other elements of the sport.
Well, that's awesome and authentic, and it shows. It shows when you're talking about it, so it comes out. And it's a big reason why I listen. I think you ask good questions all the time, and I think you bring up good points, and I think you like to bring up the negative stuff, but you don't go too far into that, right? You'll bring up what's wrong, but that's not where you live. You kind of live in that happy medium, and I always appreciate that. Yeah,
I got to try and like remove emotion from it. Like, fans' job is to ride emotion. My job's not to. My job is not to calm people down when things are bad, but look at everything rationally through a calm lens.
Stoic.
To say, okay, I mean, look, there were times this past season when I was doing post-game shows, and I wanted to post the job on Twitter, on Monster.com, and not do it because I was pissed off because of what we saw.
It was a tough year, man.
Yeah, it was tough. Look, I'm not moving rocks from one side, up a hill. The job's not difficult in that sense, but you don't want to cover a team that was as bad as they were. You don't.
It was,
and I don't want to do it again.
Yeah, it was a brutal year. I mean, I don't experience the same level you do, but it was a tough year to cover and to make videos and to do the podcast and to talk about the same chaos all the time. It's not fun, and I don't think we're walking into that type of season.
No, I don't think so either.
Based off my gut. All right, well, thank you again, Jason. Really appreciate you coming on. Please like, subscribe, leave some comments for us. Check out the team store. Jamie Baskow did a great job with the new team store. The link for it will be in the details of this. And again, share it out if you can. That also is a big help. And thank you again, Jason. Really appreciate you coming on and spending the time. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And remember to always stay gritty.